The clomping of hooves from the barn shattered the silence. Jack strode over, grabbing the fiberglass cattle prod resting by the door. Inside the dimly lit barn, heavy with the smell of damp straw and rotting manure, stood Titan. He was a massive Black Angus crossbreed bull, weighing close to a ton, even though his pitch-black coat was now covered in dust and cobwebs. Titan still exuded a quiet majesty. Plumes of white vapor puffed from his wide nostrils with every breath in the freezing air. Seeing Jack enter, Titan slightly tilted his head, his curving horns pointing forward, and took a step back. He knew this man's mood. "You broke the water trough again, didn't you, you stupid beast?" Jack roared, his hoarse voice echoing against the wooden walls. He swung the prod, striking it hard against the iron bars of the stall right next to Titan's head. Sparks flew. The screeching clang of metal startled the giant bull. He snorted, backing deep into the dark corner of the stall, his eyes wide open, yet offering absolutely no resistance. The animal's silent endurance didn't appease Jack's anger. Instead, it dug deeper into his own helplessness. In Jack's eyes, right now, Titan was no longer a living creature. He was just a giant mouth devouring the last of their meager hay, the embodiment of the failure Jack was carrying. "Stop hitting him, Dad!" a teenage voice rang out from the barn door. Leo, Jack's 15-year-old son, was swallowed up in an oversized adult coat. In his hands was a tin bucket filled with lush green alfalfa mixed with molasses, a rare, luxurious treat that was left over. Leo slipped past his father, walking straight to Titan, in stark contrast to his earlier defensive posture. The giant bull lowered his heavy head, rubbing his wet nose against Leo's shoulder. The boy ran his skinny fingers gently behind Titan's ears, then poured the delicious bucket of hay into the trough. Titan began to chew contentedly. Jack frowned, stepping forward and yanking the tin bucket from his son's hands. "How many times have I told you, Leo? Don't waste the winter alfalfa on him. That hay is to keep the ewes that are about to lamb." "But Titan has been eating moldy dry straw for a whole week," Leo fired back loudly, his tear-filled eyes glaring at his father. "He needs to keep warm, too." Jack threw the empty bucket to the ground, creating a dry clatter, his jaw clenched, blue veins bulging on his temples. He looked away, avoiding his son's gaze, his voice suddenly dropping, cold and decisive. "He doesn't need to keep warm anymore. There won't be a winter for him." Leo froze. The hand petting Titan's back suddenly stopped. A dead silence engulfed the hay barn, save for the wind whistling through the cracks. "Dad, what do you mean?" Jack pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket, then put it back. He looked out at the snow-covered yard. "I called the meat-packing plant in Bozeman. At 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. The slaughterhouse truck is coming to get him. They're paying $1,500. That money is enough for the bank to give us an extension through this winter." "No!" Leo screamed, rushing to stand in front of the giant bull's nose like a chick protecting its mother. "You can't do that! You sold the horses! You sold the tractor! I didn't say anything, but this is Titan. He's a member of this family." "He's livestock, Leo. Livestock is born to save the farm when necessary," Jack roared, the harsh reality tearing away his final disguise. Tears welled up in Leo's eyes, streaming down his cheeks, flushed red from the cold. The boy pointed a finger straight at his father's chest, every word striking like shattered glass. "You're lying! You're just taking your anger out on him because you can't save this place," Leo yelled, tears streaming down his cold, flushed cheeks. "Did you forget the blizzard 5 years ago, when the mother cow froze to death in the pasture because of a hard labor? It was you who took off your coat to wrap this orphaned calf and bring him home. It was you who carried him right into the kitchen, staying up for 3 nights straight to feed him every bottle of milk. Mom said Titan's survival was the last miracle she got to see before she died." Leo's words struck Jack's chest like a sledgehammer. His breath caught in his throat. A fleeting vision flashed in Jack's mind, the flickering firelight from the hearth. Outside, the blizzard howled. A tiny, pitch-black, shivering calf lay tucked inside Sarah's old wool blanket. Jack's hands, warm and gentle back then, carefully guiding the rubber nipple of the bottle into the animal's mouth. He sucked on it eagerly, his innocent eyes looking at him with deep gratitude, and echoing in his ears was Sarah's weak but love-filled voice. "You saved him, Jack. Let's call him Titan, because he truly is a fighter." A gut-wrenching pain surged up his throat. Jack's eyes burned, but he forced himself to swallow that weakness back down. He couldn't let himself collapse. He couldn't let the past hinder the ruthless survival of the present. The farmer's heart, squeezed tight by poverty, had broken long ago, and now it froze itself shut again. Jack's face hardened like a lifeless stone. He bent down, picked up the cattle prod, turned his back, and walked toward the door. Your mother isn't here anymore, Leo, and tomorrow morning, neither is this bull. It's best you say your goodbyes. I can't. Jack stepped out into the windy yard, leaving behind the suffocating darkness of the hay barn. He dragged his heavy footsteps toward the cold house, pretending not to hear the sobbing of his teenage son burying his face in Titan's fur, nor the deep, dark eyes of the giant bull quietly watching his back through the gap in the barn door. The slaughterhouse truck was coming, and the countdown to death had begun. 5 a.m. The entire Bitterroot Valley was still submerged in pitch-black darkness and biting cold. Jack sat motionless at the kitchen table, the cup of coffee in front of him entirely cold, coated with a thin film. He hadn't slept a wink, watching the pendulum clock ticking away lifelessly on the wall, his stomach tied in knots. Suddenly, muffled whimpers echoed from the porch. Jack pushed his chair back and stood up, cracking the door open to peer into the thick fog. The farm's 2 border collies, who usually barked loudly at any strange noise, were now huddled tightly together under the wooden stairs. Their tails were tucked under their bellies, their snouts hidden in their fur, their whole bodies trembling violently. From the horse barn, 50 yards away, the mares were frantically and continuously stomping their hooves against the wooden walls. Jack frowned, clicking on a flashlight and shining it into the murky emptiness toward the edge of the pine forest. The thick darkness was completely silent. Probably just coyotes, Jack muttered, brushing off the faint premonition of unease that had just sparked in his mind. He convinced himself with the most logical excuse of longtime ranchers. Or maybe they smell the scent of death. Animals always know when that truck is coming. 6 o'clock sharp. A roar tore through the quiet atmosphere of the dawn, sickly yellow. Murky headlights pierced the fog like the eyes of a metal monster. The rusted 18-wheeler, its trailer enclosed by dull gray iron bars. Slowly backed into the farmyard, the air brakes screeched deafeningly, the friction ear-splitting. The air was instantly suffocated by the smell of burning diesel mixed with the pungent stench of manure and dried blood emanating from the trailer floor. The burly, heavily bearded driver jumped down from the cab. He didn't bother to say hello. A cheap, half-lit cigar clamped in his mouth. He reached into the pocket of his grease-stained puffer jacket and pulled out a wad of crumpled bills. With 2 rough thumbs, he thumbed through the cash and shoved the wad hard against Jack's chest. 1,500. Every penny, he growled, exhaling a cloud of thick white smoke. Load 'em up quick. I got 3 more pickups to make at the other end of the valley before noon. Jack clutched the stack of $100 bills. The feeling of the paper money rubbing against his palm right now was incredibly rough and filthy. He shoved it hastily into his pants pocket as if afraid it would burn his hand. Leo, Jack called out loudly. The 15-year-old boy stepped out of the hay barn. His eyes were puffy and bloodshot. He walked beside Titan, one hand gripping the rope looped around the giant bull's neck. Contrary to what both the driver and Jack had expected, Titan didn't thrash or resist. The near-ton Angus crossbreed dragged his heavy steps out of the barn. He kept his massive head bowed, his heavy breathing forming white plumes of smoke that quickly vanished in the cold wind. The sound of his hooves striking the frozen mud echoed with dry, slow, and deeply resigned thuds. Exactly like a death march, the driver slammed the heavy steel ramp down from the back of the truck to the ground. The loud clanging of metal made the sheepdogs under the porch whimper even louder. "Give me the rope!" Jack croaked, snatching the rope from Leo's hand. He didn't dare look his son in the eyes. Jack pulled the rope taut, stepping onto the steel ramp. Titan obediently followed behind, but the moment his front hooves touched the cold steel board, reeking of the stench of death, Titan stopped. He stood tall like a black mountain before the gates of hell. The driver smirked, slapping his hand against the side of the truck. "Use the prod, buddy. These oversized monsters always act up at the last minute." Jack gripped the handle of the cattle prod tightly. He turned around, preparing to let out a familiar yell. But in that moment, the space around Jack seemed to freeze. All the background noise, the howling engine, the swearing driver, the whistling wind, was completely wiped away, because Titan was looking at him. The bull slowly raised his head. There was no panic, no primal rage of a cornered beast. In Titan's deep, massive, dark eyes, there was only a quiet resignation and an indescribable sadness. It was the look of a living being that seemed to understand all the helplessness of the man in front of him. A look of accepting betrayal from the father who had once plucked him from the jaws of death in the blizzard years ago. Jack's heart felt crushed. His nose stung. The stack of money in his pocket suddenly felt heavy, dragging his last shred of dignity down into the mud. His hand holding the prod trembled, hanging helplessly in the air. He wanted to throw the rope away. He wanted to tell the driver to get the hell off his land. But the image of the bank's foreclosure notice slapped him in the mind, reminding him of the cruelty of the real world. Jack bit his lip until it bled, killing the voice of his conscience. He yanked the rope violently. "Get on the truck," Jack yelled, his voice cracking, trembling to hide his weakness. "You're just an animal. You don't have the right to look at me like that." Titan blinked slowly. He lowered his head, lifting one front leg, preparing to step onto the rattling steel ramp. But just as his hoof was about to come down, the north wind suddenly changed direction. It blew straight down from the roof of the hay barn to where they were standing. Titan's nose snorted fiercely, his giant nostrils flared, the hair on his neck stood on end, and in a split second, the obedient resignation vanished completely. Without a warning roar, primal instinct exploded. The thick hemp rope, the size of 2 fingers, snapped instantly, friction tearing the skin off Jack's palm. The sudden and ferocious pull was so strong that Jack lost his balance, tumbling backward. "Damn it, the freak is going crazy!" The driver screamed in terror, frantically scrambling up into the cab and slamming the door shut. Dirt and rocks flew under the hooves. Titan spun his nearly 1-ton body around. His eyes were bloodshot, locked straight onto Jack. The giant bull pointed his curving horns forward, charging like a runaway tank. "Dad!" Leo screamed, gut-wrenchingly. The boy dashed toward the corner of the porch. Grabbing the Winchester hunting rifle and raising it, Jack scrambled backward in a panic until his back slammed hard against the rotting wooden planks of the hay barn. No way out, staring at the massive black wall of muscle rushing in to crush him. Jack's brain shut down. He squeezed his eyes shut, dropping his arms, waiting for the razor-sharp horns to pierce his chest. Everything happened in less than 3 seconds. Wood exploded, but simultaneously with the deafening crack of the barn wall, a savage screech tore through the space right above his head. Jack snapped his eyes open. Titan's hot breath blew directly into his face. The bull's horns were pinned into the wood just millimeters from Jack's ribs, pinning him tightly in place. There was no flesh-tearing pain. Instead, right on Titan's back, a massive dark shadow had just plummeted from the loft roof. A mountain lion. It had lunged down from a height of 15 feet, popping 10 razor-sharp claws, aiming with pinpoint accuracy for Jack's throat. If Titan's massive body hadn't pinned Jack against the wall to act as a shield, those claws would have ripped his throat out. The beast's claws slashed a bleeding gash across Titan's shoulder hump. The bull bellowed in fury, with a devastating toss of primal power. Titan wrenched his horns free from the wood, whipping his muscular neck backward to launch the 130-pound cougar spinning into the air. The wild beast crashed down into the mud puddle next to the truck. It screeched deafeningly, scrambling to turn its body around. Its tail lashed violently, its jaws bearing fangs dripping with foam, its belly dragging low to the ground as it prepared to launch a second pounce. Titan instantly dropped his head to shield Jack, ready for a fight to the death 10 yards away. The dry click of a round being chambered rang out. Leo was kneeling on one knee in the snow, initially. The black barrel of his rifle was aimed straight at Titan's skull, but the moment the mountain lion scrambled up from the mud puddle, the 15-year-old boy's brain lit up with understanding. The life-or-death picture was clear. His hands stopped shaking. Leo gritted his teeth, jerking the barrel of the gun straight up toward the sky. The deafening blast echoed against the mountains like rolling thunder. A bright yellow fireball flashed. A flock of crows in the old pine branches bolted into the sky in alarm. The mountain lion froze mid-attack. The stalking instinct of a predator was utterly shattered by the deafening gunshot and the imposing might of the impenetrable wall of meat in front of it. Fear overpowered hunger. It let out a choked growl, tucking its tail. Its yellow eyes glared at them one last time before it turned tail, sprinting on four legs like a gray arrow, vanishing into the thick fog of the pine forest. The farmyard fell into a state of absolute stillness. Only the echo of the gunshot slowly faded away, blending with the heavy, choked breathing of the giant bull who had just snatched his owner's life back from the hands of the grim reaper. The thin gun smoke faded into the murky fog. The acrid smell of gunpowder filled the nostrils, chasing away the pungent scent of death rising from the truck. Jack slowly slid down along the rotting wooden wall, his knees hitting the freezing ground. His lungs gasped in rapid breaths like a drowning man just breaking the surface. Around him, splintered wood lay scattered, but his body didn't have a single scratch. A few steps away, the hunting rifle slipped from Leo's trembling hands. The boy collapsed to his knees in the snow, bursting into loud sobs, tears of sheer terror, passing, and of exhausting relief. In the middle of the ruined yard, Titan stood tall. His heavy breathing formed thick clouds of white smoke. He turned his massive head. On the bulging muscle of his shoulder hump, 3 long scratch marks from the cougar's claws seeped dark red blood, dripping down onto the pristine white snow. He slightly tilted his head, looking straight at the man kneeling on the ground. There was no anger or panic. It was still that calm, forgiving, and deep gaze, the look of a living being who chose to use his own life as a shield for the one who had just tried to sell him to the slaughterhouse. Jack's heart broke into pieces. The prickly, cold shell he had built around himself over the last 5 years to fend off the pain of losing his wife and the grinding poverty completely collapsed. Hot tears welled up from his hollow eye sockets, rolling down his weathered wrinkles, dropping onto the frozen mud. Jack shakily reached out both hands, hugging Titan's massive head. He buried his face in the pitch-black fur that smelled of damp straw, ignoring the blood from the wound staining his jacket shoulder. Titan didn't back away. He let out a soft snort, obediently rubbing his wet snout against Jack's chest. "I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry," Jack sobbed, his hoarse voice breaking into the cries of a child. His rough hands clumsily tore off his worn-out coat, gently pressing it against the bleeding wound on the giant bull's back. Titan didn't back away. He let out a soft snort, obediently rubbing his wet snout against his chest. The sound of the truck window rolling down broke the quiet moment. The bearded driver stuck his head out, his face still pale with fear, and stammered, "Jesus, you all right, man? So, are we loading him up? The meat plant doesn't care about a few surface scratches. Price is still $1,500. Hearing that number, Jack slowly raised his head. The desperate and weak look from earlier had vanished, replaced by a fiery resolve that Leo hadn't seen in his father since the day his mother died. Jack stood up straight. He reached into his pocket, pulling out the wad of crumpled bills he had received less than 15 minutes ago. He took heavy steps toward the truck, throwing the wad of cash straight through the window crack, smacking the driver's chest. The $100 bills fluttered down onto the cab floor. "Take your money," Jack growled, every word clear and of steel, "and get off my land, now." "Bidar." The driver dropped his jaw, ready to argue. But seeing Jack's murderous glare and the giant bull looming close beside his owner, he instantly swallowed his words. He rolled up the window and slammed on the gas. The rusted truck roared loudly, then turned around, lumbering out of the farm gate, taking the cruelty of winter with it as it vanished into the fog, when the sound of the engine had faded away. Leo rushed over, throwing his arms around Titan's neck and burying his head in his father's shoulder. Jack wrapped one arm tightly around his son, his other hand still holding the coat pressed to the animal's back. 3 souls stood leaning on each other in the freezing dawn. But never had the Miller farm felt so warm. 6 months later, spring poured brilliant golden sunlight down on the Bitterroot Valley, chasing away the harshness of the deadly frost. The Miller farm still hadn't escaped poverty. The wooden fences still sagged, waiting to be repaired. and Jack had to work 3 extra loading shifts in town to slowly pay off the bank loan. But one thing had changed forever. This place had regained its vitality. Under the evening sun, Titan was leisurely grazing on the hillside covered in wildflowers. His pitch-black coat was now smooth and glossy under the sunlight. On his bulging shoulder hump, 3 long white scars were permanently branded, a proud medal of loyalty. A rustling sound echoed. Jack walked over from the hay barn. He didn't carry a cattle prod or a whip. In his hands was a tin bucket filled with the freshest alfalfa, mixed with grains and molasses. Hearing the familiar footsteps, Titan raised his head. He ambled toward Jack, playfully nudging his giant head against the man's chest in a delicate way that didn't match his massive frame at all. Jack burst out laughing, a hearty, genuine laugh that he thought he had lost a long time ago. He scooped up a handful of hay and brought it right up to Titan's mouth, his other hand gently stroking along the white scars on his back. "Eat up, fighter," Jack whispered. The shadow of the farmer and the giant bull stretched long across the lush green grass, weaving together into a shape of absolute silence and peace. Jack suddenly realized he hadn't saved this farm from the surrounding poverty, but thanks to the forgiveness of this speechless creature, he had saved the most precious thing of all, his own soul.